Welcome this morning. It's so much fun to be sitting with you. So, let's start with meditation. Take your attention below your belly button, all of your attention as you let it almost funnel down below your belly button. It feels so good to have everybody doing that with such ease. This is the position of grounded awareness. Where the mind is not so busy. Feel for the space between the breaths in the location just below your belly button. This is home base, safe place. My friend Michaela Carew, who teaches Qigong, says that about this space. Home base, safe place. And feel how different grounded awareness is from that space between our ears where we spend most of our lives. And then as you're ready, drop your attention lower to your tailbone. And if you feel like it, down into the earth. So we feel our natural connection to Mother Earth and all the prosperity and benefit she brings to us every day. And we can feel grateful to the sun that brings us the radiance and warmth of the daytime, the energy for growth. And the moon that brings the cool, nurturing, watery, opposite of the sun in the 24-hour growth cycle to create this abundance. And the tides that fluctuate with the moon because it's so close to the earth. And how that interacts with the day and night cycle of the sun. As it appears to us that the sun moves around the earth. Even though we know intellectually that the earth moves around the sun. So we can feel gratitude for all of that and our place in the midst of it. And we can be comfortable in the awareness that we have no power over any of it. And that healing is built into the system, as is balance and harmony. And that if we put our attention there, we not only heal ourselves, but we become in alignment with the healing process itself. And in this way, our energy supports the whole. because we no longer become an obstruction to the flow, but we are participating in what's already there, in our own desire for peace and harmony. And gradually you will notice your energy sort of welling up into your heart center as you feel the gratitude and abundance and prosperity that is built into the system. Allow that heart-centered awareness to expand in every direction. Remember, our energy goes 9 feet in every direction pretty easily. And quite naturally, it moves up into the throat center, the center of our speech, our capacity to deliver a message. And then up to the third eye, behind and between the eyebrows in the center of the head. And then out the top of the head, as our energy arises up the central channel. And circulates in 360 degrees. Our channels all flowing. And all of this happens automatically without our attention or awareness. And for a moment, imagine a world where every human being had their attention on opening all these channels, expanding their awareness, and living in peace and harmony with all of the elements of creation. And as we study the relationships of all these interacting forces, it becomes clear that there are natural laws that are as clear as gravity in our experience of being held to the earth. And then in very many ways, it is our job to appreciate everything positive that we can experience within ourselves in order to try to balance what appears to be a never-ending stream of negativity. Through parts of humanity. And we understand that our perception is limited by the forces that control the information that comes toward us. So we focus instead on the information that is inside and around us that tells us that we are safe in a place of abundance created for us to experience. And knowing that focusing on the positive, while not exactly denying the negative, we can live with a sense of peace as much as possible. And share that with like-minded people around us. Now we'll be quiet and we can all sit in the flow of this abundance for a few minutes. as you feel ready, holding your attention inside, gently open your eyes. You can take your time. Hold your attention inside as you allow the vision of the physical world to become part of your experience. How may we serve this morning? Anybody, anything? So we'll tell you a little bit about the astrology, even though you didn't ask. But one of the things that's happening is in this moment is that Jupiter is in the sky in Pisces, which is one of its happiest places. And Jupiter is the most beneficial planet for all of humanity. Not just because it's, about abundance and happiness and spirituality, but the way Jupiter is set up, it actually has a greater influence in benefic ways. Benefic is the term used in astrology to denote planets that do good. And the two, there are 4 benefics in the sky, and they always all do their best. And the only one that gets confused about whether it's good or bad is Mercury. It's very much influenced by the planets that might be around it. But Jupiter, Venus, and Moon all benefit everything they touch. Jupiter most of all, because it has a bigger range. And the way to say that is that, in the 12 houses of the zodiac, Jupiter, instead of just influencing the one across from it, which most planets do, it also influences the 1/5 and the one's 5th and 9th from it, which are it's very beneficial, that way of being. So Jupiter, in its place of highest prosperity, having a big influence for all of us over 3 other places among the 12 signs, we can say that this is a very good time for that Jupiter energy. At the same time, Venus, which is the planet of love and romance and sensuality and beauty and art and creativity, all the good things, flowers, perfume. Venus is also in Pisces, which is its place of maximum comfort. It is exalted in Pisces, and it's very close to its highest place of exaltation. So there is this, huge beneficial energy in the sky that's sort of in one location. And for Rebecca, this is my first house. In the natural horoscope, it's considered the 12th house, the house of loss. But in my particular birth horoscope, these planets are right on top of where I was born. So I feel them acutely. And so that prosperity and abundance is completely a part of the experience this morning. And as we go toward the full moon, which will happen in a couple of days, that's also close by. It's not exactly intersecting the whole event for a few more days after that. But it's all a lot of good energy pointing in the same directions. And so this can be felt by everyone. That there is a confluence of good energy and good energy locations available to humanity. And this will continue in many ways, although there's a lot of change that happens. In mid-April, Jupiter will move into Aries, the first house of the zodiac, where it will stay for 12 months. And longer, because Jupiter goes through a period where it appears to move backwards in the sky. And that's called retrograde. And planets, when they appear to move backwards in the sky, it just means that they have an unconventional view. A person who's influenced by that particular energy will have an unconventional view about their spirituality with Jupiter, because Jupiter is the planet of spirituality and gurus and spiritual teaching. Enough of that. Just thought I'd tell you what's happening in the sky today. Yes.
Hi,
Hi. How are you doing?
I'm doing today is the best day I've had in coming up on 3 weeks. I had hip replacement surgery.
Oh, congratulations. This is a big deal.
Yeah, it really is. It's a big deal, and it's been quite a process. It's been very challenging. It's not a steady growth thing. It's been all
No,
over
it's
the
a big
map.
invasion.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, over time, it will be a huge improvement.
Yes. Well, today is the first day I really feel that. I've felt that. I can actually walk a little bit
Wow.
on my feet. Yeah. And go up the stairs. I went up the stairs. I was like, woo,
This is
woohoo.
after 2 weeks.
2.5. Well, it'll be 3 weeks on Tuesday.
This is great. This is
Yeah.
great. You don't want it to happen too fast, because then you can have a relapse. But with
Yeah.
the slow, steady, and you know how to rehab your body. You've been doing it your whole life. So, and this particular area, and it will be all new and different and wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, I have felt hope. I have felt hope in this last 3 weeks, but I haven't, it's been a distant thing, but I've really felt the realness of it. And I really feel like it's coinciding with the cycles and with the seasons.
Sure sounds like it.
Yeah.
Like you picked the most auspicious time to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is really good. And this happens, when we're naturally in alignment. We just know, oh, this is the right time. And the universe behaves in accordance with what we bring to it. And this is part of why it's so important to stay positive even when it's hard. I had did we talk about the yugas last week, the cycles of humanity, human experience? Well, according to Vedic astrology, we hope this is interesting to you, there are 4 major cycles of human experience. And the most beneficial cycle of human experience is called the Sat Yuga. These are all called yugas. There are four parts to them. And the first yuga, the Sat Yuga, all of humanity understands everything, understands the purpose of life, how to be in harmony with each other and everything else. And everybody's very, very intelligent and very, very spiritual. It's just natural. It's the height of human experience and awareness. And people are so intelligent that they don't have any books or a way of recording information. Information that is shared orally is immediately understood. And so this is the context in which all of the spiritual information was downloaded from generation to generation orally, because people just naturally had the memory that could absorb that kind of information. And the whole culture was attuned to it, the whole society of the earth, so that that's just the way it was. Like, everybody knew everything and there was no problem. Okay, then the texts say that it started with gossip, but it's a cyclical experience that has been mathematically measured. At this time, we may not have the sophistication that our measurements make any sense. So we could be way off in understanding how long these cycles are. And there's some debate about how long they are, and nobody can really know, because how can you know? So anyway, you move into something called the Tret Yuga. And Tret Yuga is where there is some availability of balance and harmony, but it no longer is the dominant feature. And so disharmony begins to appear, and that lasts for a certain number of thousands of years, and gradually is getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And then you move into something called the Dwapara Yuga, which is the 3rd stage of devolution of humanity. And that is where spiritual understanding becomes less available. And, the true living in harmony becomes more and more difficult, because there's more and more disharmony evident. And so humanity has a lot of conflict going. And then there is the 4th Yuga, which is called the Kali Yuga, which is when humanity becomes devolved to the worst place. And the worst place is, people hitting each other with clubs. They don't have any kind of refinement or availability of any technology or education, or, that's the worst level. So when there's no real communication, no heart-centered awareness anywhere, and everything is just literally man and woman for themselves. And so this is the devolution cycle. And then the evolution cycle begins again. And you go from Kali Yuga back up to Dwapara Yuga, where the most optimistic understanding I have read is that we are now in Dwapara Yuga, and that happened with the discovery of electricity. And that now, as our technology is getting more and more refined, we're coming up in the Yuga. And the mathematics are questionable everywhere. Nobody knows what's real because we don't have access to the quantum understanding of the mathematics that will allow us to understand how long this cycle will last. But we are in the evolutionary phase, and in a way, it's helpful to look at this understanding, and it seems to make a lot of sense when you look at it, that things are evolving, but they're not nearly where they could be or will be. And so, you know, the understanding is that in the Vedas is that there are these natural cycles that we live through, and that in our individual lives, there is the concept of karma. And karma is, you know, we all know it as sort of that what goes around comes around idea, that energetic experience ripens to a place where there are certain experiences that we must have to grow beyond who and what we are and what our understanding is at this moment. And so there are all kinds of names for the different kinds of karmas, but the most important one to understand is called prabdha karma, which is the karma that is ripened in this lifetime for us to experience. And the idea with astrology is that the birth chart, the time of the birth, and the chart that becomes available at that time outlines the karmic forces for the life that is being lived at this time. And so this is why, even to this day, there is a huge percentage of marriages in India that are arranged marriages, not because necessarily the parents want to be in control. It's not exactly about that. It's a lot more complicated. It's that in order for a marriage to be happy, for the two people to be happy, there's certain things that must be avoided. And they can be seen from the astrology chart. And so it's about arranging a marriage where there is the potential for abundance, and the goal is contentment and happiness with the couple, so that they can have a family and happy children that will contribute to the society, the well-being of the entire society. And so, you know, along with that exists an entire caste system that makes no sense to a Western person because it takes away the freedom of choice. It appears to take away the freedom of choice. It doesn't just appear to, it does. And what you are born into is what your life is. But it's based on this idea that we are evolving individuals in an evolving or devolving culture, depending on the time in which we are born, and that we're here to have certain experiences. So, as you can see, there are a lot of challenges to a Western mind to embrace this philosophy. And so we would say that And the real reason we brought up this conversation is that Rebecca's been thinking a lot about whether or not you can live in the Sat Yuga, regardless of what yuga you were born into. And this is of course a uniquely Western concept because it has the idea that we might have some influence on at least our own evolution. And this is part of the motivation of understanding Vedic astrology is that how can we grow spiritually? How can that information help us in our spiritual growth? Well, if we can see the karmas that have been laid out for this life, then we can see the obstructions to our understanding. And in seeing the obstructions and understanding how they influence our outlook on the experiences that we have, then maybe we can work with those planetary energies and become higher and finer, more evolved people as we face our daily life. And then we can say, well, maybe it's even possible for us to envision what Sat Yuga experience could be. And to our mind, Sat Yuga is fifth dimensional experience. And we have always said since the second we met you that this fifth dimensional experience is where humanity is headed. And you understand, we don't have time. So we just want you to know that in concentrating on Sat Yuga type experience, you bring that forward, and that time, in the truest sense of the word, does not exist. That it is energetic competence, for want of a better word. The problem with competence is it immediately gives us the idea of this linear experience that, we start out incompetent and then we learn and we gradually become competent. And we know that anything to do with fifth dimensional experience is non-linear, beyond our vocabulary to even speak of, let alone understand. But we have been pointing vociferously with this conversation that, these philosophies point to an understanding that we have been trying to give you since the first day. And so we acknowledge that there are grave limitations to that understanding. For example, if you're born in the servant class, you remain a servant your whole life, no matter what you do in the classical tradition. Now, of course, India itself, in some ways, is trying to move beyond that, although the leadership is very much against it. Even to this day, there's very conservative leadership in place that is in many ways classically Vedic. And we don't really support that because we believe that democracy is a good thing for everybody. That choice is important. And we also believe that time doesn't really exist. And so if we aim for the Sat Yuga as much as possible, then it's our experience that's what our experience becomes in some way. At the same time, we recognize that there are practical limitations and practical realities that happen to all of us, the most obvious of which is death. We do have a limited time in this life, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. All of us are old enough to know that maybe we don't want to live forever in this world. And maybe that's one of the gifts of living a long time, is to understand that it's a little more complicated than just having a good time. And that our bodies are complicated and they start to wear out in certain ways. And that's a good thing and a bad thing too. You know, we're not 20 anymore. And yet we have the resilience and the understanding of our experience that gives us the capacity to truly be happy, no matter what. Because we understand that, you know, if you just wait a little bit, it's going to be different. It may be different in a better way, and it may be different in a worse way, but it's going to be different. Our experience will constantly change. And so our expectations are no longer just about fulfilling pleasure, although when it happens, we deeply appreciate it. And when it doesn't happen, we know that it will probably come back in some form, even if it's, you know, feeling the sun on our face and appreciating it. You know, smelling a flower, truly appreciating it. Hugging a puppy, truly appreciating. You know, there's so many experiences that we can truly appreciate. And, you know, the coming back of some range of motion and some less pain, and an experience that we've lived with for a long time, having that change for the better. So, yeah. So we can create and appreciate the moments when we resonate with Sat Yuga. We will not have the intelligence to absorb an oral tradition in one hearing. I don't think any of us can aspire to that. But we have the intelligence to appreciate what we've been given, as long as it lasts, and the experience and wisdom to not try to grab on to anything, since we understand that it's all changing. So we can allow things to just be, appreciate the good, understand that the bad will change as well, and attempt to come into equilibrium with all of it. And the real thing that we understand with age is that we have very little control over any of it, except what happens inside of us. And, you know, as we said, most of this conversation, we don't have control over most of it. You know, there are powerful forces at work, always. But understanding that there are powerful forces at work allows us to hopefully relax into our experience and cultivate a really very aware state of equanimity. We welcome your questions. That was a lot about astrology. Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoy. Yes.
It's a very broad question about difficult negative emotions, as depression, fear, anger, and how they can be utilized towards a deeper spiritual understanding.
So we're going to answer in an equally broad way. So the question is really what to do with negative experience, and not just negative experience, but these habits of mind like depression. And we'll say habits of mind, but they could very easily be habits of planetary refraction, that there's certain energies that when they are in our natal, the birth chart that we're born with, there are certain energies that lend themselves to experiencing the world as an unhappy place, experiencing our own unhappiness and the experience of unhappiness in others. And for a lot of us who are empathic, we don't even know the difference between our own unhappiness and the unhappiness of the others around us until we reach a certain age of awareness where we suddenly get that the unhappiness we experience isn't just our own. And that's true for a lot of us. So it's not exactly that. We could say that the purpose of these experiences is to draw our attention inward, to try to understand how to cultivate something different within ourselves. And that we are naturally drawn to that over time because we recognize that not everybody is having that experience of, we'll just use depression as an example. And we'll say that depression is experiencing a quality of sadness, a quality of grief, a quality of sorrow, or disconnection from others, or from the happiness that we perceive might be available, that for some reason we don't have that experience available to us regularly. And this is true for a large part of humanity, a large part of the time. And so there are various things we can do with this. There are lots of tools out there. There's therapy. We don't have a lot good to say about the pharmacological treatment of these states, because it's not been our experience that. So we'll tell you what Rebecca thinks about antidepressants. So almost all the antidepressants on the market now have to do with the attempt to manipulate neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the information systems that inform the brain about how to feel. So our intuition is that there are many more neurotransmitters that are active than those which have been discovered, and that they all interact in very subtle feedback systems. And so trying to manipulate that which we are unaware of and in pharmaceutical medicine, if something has not been named, it doesn't exist. So the fact that there are neurotransmitters that have not been identified means that in our understanding of how the brain works, especially when it comes to emotional function, we don't have enough information. And so the pharmaceuticals that have been developed so far are like shooting in the dark. And if they happen to work, it's by accident. And so many of the things that are used as antidepressants were discovered accidentally as they were searching for things to mitigate physical symptoms in some other way. So it's our experience that pharmaceuticals very often cloud the situation without providing hoped for resolution in terms of good feeling. So we've never been drawn to experiment with them in terms of our own personal care. Instead, we've gone toward homeopathy, which uses natural substances in energetic ways to try to influence the system, and is sometimes very successful, although not always for long periods of time. And so that's a way to mitigate some of this. There is, you know, all of us probably on this call have lived through periods of grief, depression, absorbing of difficult, painful experience. And so we all can talk about that with some experience of our own. We all can relate to that experience. And one of the things that we understand from that experience is that when one goes through pain and reorganization, that coming out the other side, there is almost always a different understanding that allows us to be more helpful to ourselves and others in going through these kinds of situations, that they change us in ways that we could not have anticipated before they happen, and generally for the better. So having had that experience, we can bring that understanding when we are in a grief or disappointed, or just a naturally, you know, we've fallen into that depression rut. We can understand that our empathy actually is intimately related to our ability to experience our pain and help others. So there's that. And we are not in favor of gutting it out through these experiences. We are in favor of communicating with each other. And sometimes therapy is really, really helpful because there are tools. And we can say, again, from an astrological perspective, there are cycles that every human being goes through where heavy planets that have to do with grief and sorrow and pain, which will be experienced, they are built into the system for every human being. And it's, it's a period, it's a 7-year long period that every human being goes through at some point in their lives, where takes Saturn 2.5 years to go through a sign in the zodiac. And Saturn brings with it sadness, despair, darkness, difficulty, sorrow, grief. These things naturally come. But Saturn isn't there to make us miserable. These Saturn periods help us understand that life isn't just about being happy. They bring us to the understanding of equanimity. It's another way of saying that these difficult experiences that we go through give us a different kind of empathy for the whole, a different kind of understanding of what life is. You remember the first time someone that you knew closely died. That experience completely shakes our understanding to the foundations. And we can't say that it's good or bad, it just is, and it happens to every single one of us, eventually. So, but understanding that this 7-year period happens and knowing when it's happening for you, forewarned and forearmed, can be the same thing. So that you know about it, you can and then you can prepare yourself, and you can actually say mantras that may have some mitigating experience, may have some mitigating force as you go through the experience of the difficulty. You can, in a way, worship the powers that, it's hard to say, because we've spoken about mantra before. These are energies, Sat Yuga energies, that were understood and from a spiritual language perspective recorded as spiritual language that is like a lock and key system with these energies. We can say it like that. And so, to our mind, a lot of what the astrological chart can be is, mantra prescription for dealing with these energies. And we think it's no accident that suddenly the mantras for individual charts have been published. They've never been available. They've never been available before, especially not to the Western world. So it's a very interesting thing. And then the value of astrological expertise is in knowing when it's important to employ what. because it's not exactly straightforward. It's the most complicated thing we've ever studied. So, I guess today is astrology lecture day. Oh, we're glad. We're glad. So you can see why it's such a consuming passion at the moment, because there's so much depth to it, so much historical understanding, much of which has been lost. You know, the most important Vedic text is called the Rig Veda, which has 4 parts to it. It's very, very long. And most of it's not about astrology at all. There's only a small part of it that's about astrology. But that's where it comes from. And it's the Sat Yuga text that we know of. And, you know, I'm not an authority. I'm still a very beginner. Did that answer your question? Yes.
So I have been using, ever since I heard that it was Kali Yuga, I've been using that as whenever something comes up in my life or in the world, one of my mantras has been, hey, what are you going to do? It's Kali Yuga. And you just pulled the rug out from under me on that. So thank you.
Yes. Well, you can thank Sri Yukteswar. Sri Yukteswar was the astrologer who was Yogananda's guru. Interestingly, Yogananda himself, at a certain point in his life, was handed his astrological chart and told that he was going to be married 3 times. After he was told that he was going to be married 3 times in his life, he took his chart, he wadded it up and threw it in the fireplace. And he said, this will not happen. And it didn't. His parents tried, but no, it didn't happen. And so he understood astrology very well and the limitations of it. So he was an avatar. So he had the capacity to live beyond his chart. But I think that's a fascinating story, that somebody who had access to the best quality of information, whether he knew it himself, had access to the best astrologer of the time, said, this is Hui. Not because it wasn't true, but because in understanding one's apparent destiny, there is the power to forewarned can be forearmed. And he was steeped in the entire culture, so he understood it's in a very intuitive way. And my intuition about those people, Yogananda and his teacher and the people in his Indian ashram, that he was bringing Sat Yuga teachings to the US. And it's so interesting because I've been looking at his chart the last few days, and one of the important things in his chart is in the house of spirituality, he has the planet, the shadow planet Rahu, in his ninth house of spirituality. And Rahu is about foreign things, foreign places, foreign people, and foreign ideas. And what did Yogananda do? But he came to the United States, and he was here for several decades teaching spirituality. But not only did he teach spirituality, but he absorbed Christianity. He read the Bible very deeply, and he wrote a 2-volume book about Christianity from a Hindu perspective, from the perspective of the Vedas. And so I have yet to read that book, so I'm not going to say any more about it, except that you can see in his chart that he was going to take spirituality to a foreign place, and that he was going to interact with that foreign place in such a way that made spirituality adaptable to the culture that he was taking it to, because his own understanding was so evolved that he could bridge the language barrier and the cultural understanding barrier between the Western mind and the Eastern philosophy, to the point where he's probably directly responsible for the fact that we're having this conversation right now. Isn't that mind-boggling? Yes.
I have a quick question. You've said on occasion that it's very difficult to know whether or not the time that you were born is accurate, that it might not have been accurately recorded, or for a number of reasons you don't have that exact knowledge. Does that mean that you can't ever have a chart? Because it seems as though it would leave you out of the whole astrology bit, according to your own personal trajectory.
There is a whole science of astrology called rectification, chart rectification, where and it becomes easier as the person ages, because you can, there is the chart itself. And then from this birth chart, there are cycles, life cycles, that a person goes through where different planets are sort of running the show for you at different times. And so you can look at the life cycles next to the chart itself, along with the life events that have happened to the person. And you can correlate the life events that happened with the circumstances, and you can come to what's called a rectified birth time, where the chart makes sense.
That's very interesting, very cool.
Yes, and there are people who specialize in this.
Yeah, that's
astrology has areas of specialty because it's so complicated. And so, I asked my teacher about this, and he immediately gave me a name of somebody else. He doesn't do it, but there are other people who do. And so that's possible. Now, it can get you in trouble, because I'll tell you my own story very briefly. And that is that I had a number of readings from a very fine astrologer at a point in my life where I was having what I thought were a lot of happy experiences. And he was giving me a reading that month after month. He would say, he was Indian, he would say nervousness, anxiousness, depression, fears, February, nervousness, anxiousness, depression, fears. And he went through the whole year and it was like this. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't, I'd watch over time and try to correlate it with my experience, and it wasn't what was happening. But I've come to realize that in certain ways it was the fundamental current, but the experiences that were happening were so good over that I was really living above that sort of frequency. But at the time, I thought, this is crazy. I'm going to go to another astrologer, an American, and they must have the wrong chart for him to be saying this. So I went to another astrologer who actually was somebody who teaches at the place where I study now. And it told him this story and, the name of the astrologer. And he was like, well, that's possible. And he looked at my chart and he took a whole history of my life events and correlated them and came up with another chart. Now that chart almost cost me an entire year of study because I thought that was my chart. And in trying to understand myself through Vedic astrology, I got so confused, I almost felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown because the way I was experiencing the planets, the planetary energies in myself and the chart I had in front of me were almost diametrically opposed, because the conclusion he came to is that it's complicated. My mother always said I was born in time for lunch, and my birth certificate said I was born at 25 minutes after midnight. And so he said, okay, born in time for lunch. So he focused on that area, which is 12 hours apart from where I was actually born. And so, I felt like I was going insane trying to feel into that experience. But it taught me a lot to be very careful about rectification and recommending it for people. And, it has power. The whole thing has power, which is why it's so fascinating. So here we are, and I do want us all to meditate a bit longer so we can, really experience the essence of why we're together and continue to cultivate that. Take a little sip. So let's take our attention inside again. And we can all meditate however we wish in these moments. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So much fun. And great apologies for any information that I got wrong. So much love to you.